everybody, bienvenidos otra vez a mi canal. Welcome back to my channel. How are you guys doing? I hope you're having a nice week so far. If you're here, you probably know by now that I am somebody who loves languages, and I always have. And about 10 years ago was the first time that I started learning a new language, which was Spanish. Speaking other languages is something that has completely changed my world. And it was something that was a much longer and much more complicated process than I ever could have expected to truly become fluent in another language. Recently, I also decided to go upon the journey of learning a third language, Portuguese. And I'm so glad that I had the experience of learning my second language to guide me on this trip of learning my third language. And it has been much faster than it took me to actually become fluent in Spanish. Over a year ago or so, I made a video on this channel describing what I thought would be my best tips if I were to tell you how to learn a language from zero and how to actually achieve fluency in that language. But now that I've had a little bit more experience on my own learning a new language again, and also through more experience teaching English and Spanish, I decided that I wanted to update my list a little bit and give you guys a little bit more of a thorough review of what I would do if I was to learn a new language all over again, and my top 10 tips of what I think you should be doing if you want to actually become fluent in a new language. Before I get into my tips, I also want to give you guys a little bit of background about myself in Spanish to prove my chops and also show you that you can do it too. Yo llevo ya 11 años aprendiendo, hablando y ahora enseñando español. Yo vengo de una familia que solo habla inglés, o sea, yo soy la única persona en toda mi familia que habla español como segundo idioma. Eso significa siempre que viajo con mi familia tengo que traducir para todos, y es algo muy interesante en mi vida tener básicamente una vida split entre el inglés y español. Ha sido un largo viaje para llegar a ser fluida en español. Empecé a aprender a los 14 años en el colegio y desde entonces he estado estudiando todos los años un poco más y descubriendo otros tips, otros consejos para seguir adelante con lo de aprender otro idioma, ¿no? Al final, saqué mi título en lengua española, viví en España, he viajado mucho y aquí estoy hoy en día en 2025. And now that I've spoken a little bit of my Spanish, let's get into the tips. Starting out with my number one tip when it comes to learning a language, the number one thing that you can do is be realistic. And what do I mean by this? Oftentimes when we start learning a language, we really feel like we are so motivated. It's like when you join the gym, right? You say, I'm gonna get fit this year, I'm gonna hit it hard, and every single day I'm gonna go to the gym for 2 hours, and by the end of 3 months, I'm gonna be fit. In reality, language is an extremely frustrating, long, and difficult process. It's not something that's going to come to you naturally always. And I think when we start learning a language and we have that new spark of motivation, where people really start to drop off from that initial motivation is when it starts to get difficult. And like I said, in reality, language is a complicated process. You're going to mess up. You're going to embarrass yourself. You're going to feel frustrated. You're going to feel like you're not making progress. There are so many elements and so many realities to learning a language that if you don't set a realistic expectation for yourself, you're gonna give up and you're gonna burn out. What do realistic expectations look like? Instead of saying, I want to be fluent by the end of this year, you can say, I want to have a 5-minute conversation with someone in 6 months. I want to be able to order food at a restaurant by the end of this month. I want to practice on a language learning app for 3 minutes a day. These are things that are achievable and doable rather than extreme or difficult. And if you set yourself little benchmarks and give yourself little rewards along the way, you're gonna feel much more satisfied with the language learning process than if you had done it so bulky and heavy at the very beginning. And that kind of leads me into my number 2 tip. Think of learning a language as going to the gym. This is the best analogy that I found to explain to my own students and myself as I learn Portuguese now. Learning and becoming fluent in a language is a matter of muscle memory and a matter of breaking the habits that you're making with yourself while learning. You're going to start out with a lot of motivation. You're going to say, I want to travel abroad this year. I want to be fluent and I'm going to try every single day. You're going to start learning every single day, similar to the gym. You're going to start lifting every single day. You're going to feel progress. You're going to feel like you can have a basic conversation. You're going to feel so proud of yourself. And then one day, you're going to reach a point where it's been weeks and you feel like nothing has happened. This is what I like to describe as the plateau. And the plateau phase in learning a language is the worst. You're going to feel like it's too hard, like you want to give up. Maybe you watched a video of someone speaking your target language and all of a sudden you realize that you don't know as much as you thought you did, and it's frustrating. And if you don't get through that frustration is where really you're going to drop off the deep end. But the nice part is similar to the gym as well. You're going to build muscle memory. Once you make that base, even though maybe in the moment you might not remember, if you take a short break and you come back, you're going to swing back way faster than if you hadn't had that base in the first place. This is why people who took Spanish all the way back in high school and now are 45 have a way better time learning Spanish than someone who's never heard it in their life. Even though that person hasn't touched a book in quite a while, they still have that base and that memory in the back of their brain that will always stay there. So think of it as a long-term process rather than a short one. Again, being realistic. My third and maybe most or one of the most important tips on this list is to make relationships with real human people that speak a language. If you're learning Spanish, for example, try your best to meet, to connect with online, through social media, through various websites. See if you can find and make a friendship, a relationship, a romantic relationship, whatever you want, with someone that actually speaks the language. Psychologically, your brain is more likely to want to achieve a goal when it's with the motivation of something that involves your feelings. And if you have a vested interest in communicating with, the well-being of, connecting with, understanding another person, you're way more likely to be able to converse with them and learn more as you go along the way. This also provides a safe space for you when you're learning your language. If you have somebody that you have confidence with, that you can speak with, if you make a mistake and then correct you, it's not going to feel as frustrating and embarrassing as if it were someone that was a stranger, for example. Even if you have a teacher that you tutor with every single week in your new language, you want to talk with them and chat with them and get to know them. That is such a valuable and important way to be able to motivate yourself every day, to have that reason that you come back every single week and learn your new language. And speaking of actually connecting with people, another important thing that you should be doing if you're learning a new language is speaking. It's very easy for us to get trapped in the monotonous cycle of reading words every day, doing vocab practice, grammar practice on an app or something that's just going to make it feel repetitive and that you're not actually using your voice out loud. Even something as simple as recording yourself reading a text and hearing it back to kind of see where your pronunciation might be useful, talking to random people online, or just speaking in general in any way that you prefer is a really great way to hear yourself speaking out loud so that it doesn't feel as scary when you get to the real thing. And if you're someone who might be a little bit frightened or shy about speaking to real humans right away when you're learning a language, there's actually a solution for you, which makes this the perfect moment to actually thank the sponsor of today's video. Yes, you guys, we got a sponsor today. Speak, an app that's built entirely around real spoken language. Speak is one of the only language learning apps that I found that gets you talking from day one. You're not just tapping through flashcards, you're saying full sentences out loud, practicing real-world conversations, and getting instant feedback on your pronunciation. It's powered by AI, so it adapts to your pace and helps you build confidence fast, whether you're prepping for a trip, reconnecting with your roots, or just trying to sound less awkward on your next coffee order abroad. Besides Spanish and English, they just launched French, Korean, Japanese, and Italian, which is pretty dangerous if you're like me and love collecting languages like Pokemon cards. So if you're ready to move on from just learning a language to actually speaking it, check out the link in the description to download Speak. Thanks again to Speak for sponsoring this video, and check it out if you're interested in practicing more. Alright, so let's get on to our next tip, actually practicing your speech in context. Now, a lot of apps or language learning things that you're going to try out are going to have you say one sentence at a time or even one word at a time. And while this can help with things like pronunciation, it isn't really necessarily useful when it comes to actually knowing how to put language in context. We all know context is everything, and if you don't know how to put things into context, it doesn't really help that you know random words, right? So instead of maybe saying one sentence at a time or memorizing words out loud, you can try and put those words in different sentences. Imagine a dialogue or talk to someone about the topics that you're learning. When you hear these words and these phrases actually put in context, whether you're consuming it or whether you're talking about it yourself, it will help you feel a little bit more like you can use it in a natural sense in the future. The next tip I have that's something pretty interesting and one that wasn't really recommended to me very often when I was learning Spanish is study phonetics. A lot of my students ask me when they're learning Spanish, Maddie, how do I improve my accent? I don't want to sound foreign. I don't want to sound gringo. I don't want to sound like I'm from another place. I want people to take me seriously as a native speaker. And while I actually do believe that it's kind of beautiful to keep a little bit of your original accent when you're speaking a new language, obviously having people understand you is very important. There's a million classes out there that will teach you how to improve your accent little by little and things like that, but what actually helped me the most in my Spanish studies to get a good fluent sounding accent was studying phonetics. If you don't know, phonetics is the study of sounds and how they're formed in our mouths and how sounds are kind of made in general, and each language has its own set of phonetic rules. Now, it's obvious we know that in Spanish, for example, la R, the R sound, is something that's a little bit hard for English speakers, but there are other aspects of phonetics that people don't even think about. For example, how vowel sounds are pronounced is something that is really easy for people to tell that you're not or from a certain country when you're speaking their language. Things like aspirated versus non-aspirated sounds, or where your tongue should be placed, those are all things that probably no one ever actually taught to you, but if you don't have the natural knack for imitating accents, this is a really good way to actually study the science behind how and why sounds are made in a language. Additionally, I just think it's interesting. So definitely check out a phonetics class if you have the chance to do so. Now, again, like I said, it's very important to have realistic goals when you learn a language. However, if your goal is to learn a language as quick as possible, or like maybe you have a trip going somewhere and you have to leave in 3 months and you need to learn as much of the language as you can in those 3 months, my top one recommendation for that would be to study high frequency words. Now, anything from vocab, transition words, filler words, all of these high frequency words that you're going to hear over and over are going to help you when it comes to connecting the dots as quick as possible in a language. Words like hacer, tomar, ser, estar, pues, pero, o sea, all of the transition words, or all of the words that you probably see the most coming up in the language, are the ones that you should study first. Don't focus on the hyperspecifics, focus on the basics and the ones that you hear the most. Now, how do you know what high frequency verbs are? There's plenty of ways you can do that. Look it up on Google, look it up on AI, look up a list of recommendations from people that you know who have learned the languages, but focus on high frequency words. That will speed it up a lot more for you. My next tip is one that people often ask me, how was I able to do it? When I tell people that I became fluent in Spanish on my own account without having family members speaking Spanish and without necessarily having lived at that time in another country, people always ask me, how were you able to learn a language without being immersed? And this is where my next and really important tip comes in. You can immerse yourself no matter where you live in a new language. All it takes is dedication and integrating your hobbies into a language. Something that people don't realize about learning a language often is the fact that it's not like math or science or biology where, yeah, you'll probably use it every once in a while in your life, but it's not something that you use every single day, right? In the case of language, language is how you think. It's how you live. It's what you do every day, because language is just a representation of the people who speak it, right? So if you like soccer in English, then you can like soccer in Spanish. If you like painting in English, then go watch tutorials of somebody painting in Spanish. If you like makeup, go look for makeup influencers on TikTok that speak in Spanish. There are so many ways you can immerse yourself that have nothing to do with moving or immigrating to a new country. In my case, I learned a bunch of Spanish through literally listening to music. I love music, and I love memorizing songs and looking up their lyrics and analyzing them. And through that, I have learned so much more Spanish than I ever would have expected. I also love painting. I used to watch painting tutorials in Spanish. I love cooking. I used to follow recipes in Spanish. I changed my phone language to Spanish. I started watching TV shows, movies, YouTube, everything I could, I watched it in Spanish, and that helped me so much, because the more that you hear the language being spoken in a native way, the more that you're going to be able to imitate, mimic, and understand patterns that maybe you wouldn't if you're just reading. It's also worthy to note that in a language, people often don't necessarily speak by the book. Obviously, in English, we say many things that are grammatically incorrect, but colloquially super normal. The same happens in Spanish. It's kind of like that meme of when people say the Spanish I learned in class versus the Spanish that I had to end up seeing in real life. That is so true. So the more that you can integrate yourself, kind of make it natural for you, the more that you're going to speak fluently without even realizing it. And my last and final number 10 tip for today, and it's gonna sound cheesy, but I actually truly mean it, and coming from somebody who's currently in the process of learning my third language right now, I believe this more than ever. The number 10, probably simplest but most important tip that I can have for you is don't give up when it gets hard. You are gonna go through heartbreak over and over again when you learn a language, and I don't mean romantic heartbreak, well maybe, but also emotional heartbreak when it comes to not feeling like you're smart enough, fast enough, fluent enough. It's never ending. I'm 11 years into my Spanish journey, and there are still days that I wake up and I feel like I have no idea what I'm doing. And that's coming from somebody who has a degree in the Spanish language and is now a Spanish teacher. The feeling of not being good enough is probably the hardest part about learning a language, way harder than grammar, way harder than vocab, way harder than memorizing. It's the self-doubt, and this is why people say that kids actually learn languages way better and faster than adults. It's not because they have different brain capacity than us. It's because they are way more confident in themselves and don't question things as much as we do. So truly, at the end of the day, expect that it's going to take a long time, expect that it's going to be a long process, and expect that you're probably going to want to give up at some point. So keep your goals close and keep your goals in mind along this process. In my case, learning a language has opened me up to so many opportunities and so many different privileges and just amazing experiences in my life that I would have never gotten if it weren't for taking the leap to learn a new language, to go outside of my culture, to question myself, and to let myself be vulnerable and less smart in a new place. It takes a lot of setting your ego aside. It takes a lot of accepting that you're not going to be the smartest person in the room anymore, or the person who knows the most words, or can think of things the fastest. But through that process, you will gain so much respect, so much empathy, and so many connections that you probably would have never had if it weren't for this experience. So if that's a little bit of motivation for you today, I hope it worked. Thank you so much for joining me today for this video. Muitas gracias por estar acá como siempre. Muito obrigada. Também posso falar um pouquinho de português. Espero que tengan muy lindo día. I hope you have an amazing, wonderful, awesome rest of your day, and I will see you all in the next video.